evolution in customer experience, and I actually have an article in Quality Progress that challenges quality professionals to really broaden their viewpoint, because customer experience is now a top priority for most companies, and if quality doesn't take control of that, there are a bunch of other actors within most organizations that are looking at that as their big opportunity, and quality could get downgraded dramatically if it doesn't broaden its purview to the broad customer experience. And I'll be introducing a broader approach to root cause analysis and to project selection in the next few minutes. We're then going to talk about my approach to customer experience, which is 3.0, which basically says that a company needs to be proactive and preventive, and when appropriate, engaging with a customer. And again, we argue that quality has a huge opportunity in that area. We're then going to talk about how do you measure and analyze the customer experience, and I'm going to be suggesting a very different approach to both surveys and analyzing customer contacts and complaints, and also suggest that there are some other sources of data that describe the customer experience that in most companies no one's even looking at the data, but it's a huge opportunity. And then finally we'll give you sort of a checklist as to how to get started. All this is coming out in my book Customer Experience 3.0, which you can get on Amazon for. Now, to set the stage, Norval had mentioned that we had done a study for the White House way back when, looking at customer service and complaint handling. And we've replicated that study about 8 times since then. And what we have found, somewhat shockingly, is that service is no better now than it was in 1976. There are actually more problems, and resolution have changed. In the past, when we did a cross-section, their cars are picks. Now what we're finding is that people are driven nuts by technology. It's your cell phone, your computers, and what we found was, even for the most serious problem that households had over the last year, more than 20%, and there's sort of a good reason, did complain. 2/3 of them basically didn't get their problem resolved. We in each of these waves of studies, how much money the problem had not been passed. It was thousands of dollars because I couldn't get my car repaired, and $160. And we said, well, that. But then the customer went on to say, but I wasted says that while people's time is, and so the more hassle there is, the more you're driving the customer. Major impression that most of the world has is that everything is now done on the internet, but what we found was when you get down to serious issues, 7 times as many customers picked up the phone and called as tried to resolve their problem over the internet, and 16% actually showed up on your doorstep. Now, I'll come back to this, but we've actually found this same type of behavior applies in spades in business-to-business environments. Assume they're hearing from all of their unhappy customers. In fact, rates are lower in B2B than in B2C because term relationship with you, and if I'm unhappy with my sales rep, and so we actually find complaint rates are lower. I ask customers, what did you want? And we find most companies happy need to do are fix them and give you your money back. And if we do those 2 things, more interested in the problem, and they want observation there is that very equipped or prepared to respond to either of those issues, and it might happen. Now, when you don't deliver those, that's when we find customers start looking for revenge and actually go social. Our data shows only about 3% of Americans immediately start complaining on social media, but if they're rebuffed, none of that. But a lot of companies will, when you're on hold, will that says for faster service, go to our website. Our data of the way is that they couldn't find what they were looking for on the web message. Secondly, is your call is important to us. The fact that I am getting important. The 800 number channel. Gee, if we don't give them the 800 number, maybe they'll just self-serve. That does not work. Also, we find, especially in B2B environments, especially small businesses, your hours of operation are not congruent in financial services. I asked representatives, your good customers, your home phone number, and people look at me, are you not? If your customer is reading Saturday morning, that's when they're going to need assistance. When your customers are using your product 7 anything, but if I haven't helped you with the original, that again is gasoline on the fire. Now the book Customer Experience 3.0 really makes 6 basic points. First, we find most organizations assume that frontline staff are the cause of most bad customer experiences. Our data suggests that staff only cause 10% or less broken processes, frontline rep caused the problem and have a public hanging are absolutely missing the boat. Now we actually have a new article coming out in Quality Progress on lead to sales and marketing, and when I did a lit search back through Quality Progress, find quality and marketing so opportunities for where quality professionals should be focusing. Ability and clear explanations. When the situations need American what we call flexible solution spaces. For this tough issue, there are 4 ways of handling it depending on use your best judgment. Also, we find explanations as to why you do what most companies, if you're saying no to the customer or giving him bad, represented 2 answers, which is a their answer is, yeah, so you can ask your frontline staff what 3 that you can't defend because if you're going to give one of those 2 answers. On the other hand, if the employee is equipped with a clear, believable bad news to the customer and still retain their loyalty. Pilot gets on and says we have a 1-hour delay due to a mechanical leak in hydraulics. I'm willing to wait another 30 minutes. So we joke at Lexus that when you're saying no to the customer or giving him bad news, the object as to that they're looking for to do line staff what to tell the customer that you can finding customer expectation is you want to create delight in a sensible fashion. For Filet, they mother to cruise the dining room, pouring sweet tea, saying, "Oh, would you like a few more?" And her job description is to create what I'm not sure Granny knows what 22. You can make that a memorable. Technology is the key to when you have built that into the technology, we send you the email. If Amazon had to have a human being call you on do that in a now we have to 20 times to good customer experience, and most organizations to give prevent issues from taking place. And then finally, the voice of the customer is more than surveys and complaints. And the example here I would use is Federal Express. At FedEx, they have internal operational data that says, oops, that container missed the flight in Memphis this past survey. How to do in the same set of events. And so the key finding of this webinar really is go back and look at your operational data, and you will see what you are about to do to the customer, and it will be a leading indicator that will tell you what calls you're going to get and what your surveys are going to say. Now, as I've said earlier, we find this behavior applies both to consumer and business to business because businesses have long-term relationships with companies, and so if you're unhappy with your sales rep or your support rep, you got to continue doing business with that person. And so the attitude we see in most corporations is, well, if I complain about that person, they're still going to be here, and the next meeting is going to be very uncomfortable. So we actually find that complaint rates and transparent feedback on surveys from business customers is actually reduced significantly compared to consumer environments. Now, in terms of root cause analysis, we find that most organizations, as I said, assume that employees are the cause of most dissatisfaction. At maximum, it's 20%, and in most cases, it's 10%. We find customers cause another 20 to 30% of dissatisfaction, and then companies cause the rest, either because their products and services have unpleasant surprises built into them, or marketing and sales miscommunicate or mislead the customer, plus you have broken processes. So our contention is that basically you are building dissatisfaction in, and if one really does a root cause analysis using this conceptual framework, you can immediately start identifying opportunities for preventing issues by helping the customer avoid fixable problems. And our contention is at least 30% of all problems can be prevented via proactive communication. Also, I noticed that one question that came up is, can we get a copy of the slides? And yes, those slides will be available. You can either, I think you can get them from Norval, or else just send me an email. My email address will be available at the end. I'll be happy to send you the slides and a series of papers that I'll also be alluding to. Now, we also have another customer behavior, which is called the tip of the iceberg, which basically says that for every problem that occurs out there, you're only going to hear a limited percentage of those at either the front line and even a smaller percentage at the management level. For each complaint you hear at a management level, there are at least 20 and in many cases 50 or up to 200 similar occurrences out there in the marketplace that you're not hearing about. And this is what we call the multiplier. For each one we hear about, how many other issues are there in the marketplace? And again, this multiplier, depending on the environment, can be anywhere from 1 to 5 to 1 to 200. And the reasons is that people say it's too much trouble to complain, it's not going to do any good because that's the way your company or even your whole industry behaves, or fear of retribution. If I complain about that sales rep or service tech, they're going to do something bad to me next time. And again, think about your own behavior. You pick your battles very, very carefully. Now, we also have found that problems create sensitivity to price. This is data from financial services, but we've done this in probably 25 different industries, and what we find, the left axis is dissatisfaction with price or fees. And what we find is if people have had no recent problem, only about 10% of people are dissatisfied with price. The minute that I have one problem, dissatisfaction with price doubles. If I have two problems, sensitivity to price doubles again. The message to finance is, if you want to charge a premium, you better give darn good service and help the customer avoid problems. Now, finally, the last customer behavior is delight. And everyone talks about the Nordstrom story, where the Nordstrom's clerk took back tires when Nordstrom's doesn't even sell tires, and that's what I call heroics. And you do certainly get a lift, in this case 12 to 14 point top box lift in willingness to recommend, but that's expensive. And so we find that the 90-second schmooze with the customer, the microburst of emotional connection, or cross-selling them a new product will give you a 25 or 30% top box lift. But the really neat thing is, if you proactively educate the customer on how to avoid problems or how to get more out of the product, that's the most powerful delighter. Now, again, sales and marketing doesn't want to talk to the customer about problems. But if you educate the customer on, here are 3 possible ways of getting into trouble with our product, and by the way, here's how to avoid those, the customer's reaction is, you cared enough to take the time to educate me, and so I'm going to trust you more, and I'm willing to pay a premium for that. So it's very counterintuitive. The exact things that sales and marketing don't want to talk about, in fact, are the most powerful delighter. And again, you should be communicating this kind of data to your sales and marketing people. Now, if you effectively give great service, what we find is you foster a lot of positive word of mouth. And we find in every company, poor service and bad experiences lose customers, but great service fosters positive word of mouth at no cost, and you generate a whole bunch of new customers. And an example of how powerful this can be is that at Chick-fil-A, 70% of all their new customers are drugged in by an existing customer, so they get those customers at no expense. And at the Cheesecake Factory, their marketing expense is 25% that of their competitors, because, to quote their president, we let our customers do our selling for us. USAA, Harley-Davidson have exactly the same kinds of numbers. Now, to be proactive, the dictionary definition of being proactive is to control situations by causing action rather than waiting to respond. And there are 2 approaches. One is the FedEx approach, which is, hey, we know that the package missed the connection, so we reach out to you before you call us, and we tell you what we're going to do about it. I would contend that every company on this phone call is in possession of operational data that says what they are about to do to their customer. The issue is anybody even looking at it? In most cases, the answer is no. Now, you can also predict what may happen. At Harley-Davidson, they have identified that if you're storing your bike outside in the winter, and they can use zip codes to figure out who that is, they know that that first nice day in March when you want to go for a ride, your battery will be dead. And so they, in February, send you an email that says, if you're storing your bike outside, your battery will be dead, but we have this $40 charger on our website. Buy that, bring the battery in, charge it, you'll be all set to go in March. So they make more money while eliminating the problem. The benefits of being proactive is it costs 1/3 as much, you eliminate a whole bunch of customer uncertainty, and you are becoming easier to do business with because you're anticipating what the customer's question is going to be. I have a concept I call psychic pizza, which I ring your doorbell and say, here is the pizza you were about to order. If I know what your next request for information or what your next problem is probably going to be, and I get to you before you get to me, I dazzle your socks off, plus I don't even need to handle the service transaction. Also, you fix problems you otherwise wouldn't have heard about because of the tip of the iceberg. The vast majority of customers who are unhappy don't bother complaining. And then finally, we find 50% of turnover among good employees is due to, you know, I'm not getting paid enough to take all this crap. Now, there are two things you can do: pay them more or reduce the hassles. And by eliminating conflict with customers about stupid problems that could have been avoided, you end up with much happier employees, and at the same time, you've also got happier customers and lower costs. So it's really a threefer. Now, number of very practical examples of anticipation and being proactive. Domino's Pizza has found out that you really don't need your pizza in 30 minutes. What you want to know is, where is my pizza in the process? This goes back to my allusion to uncertainty. Where are we in the process? This tracker tells you exactly where it is, and they have found satisfaction has gone up dramatically, number of phone calls has gone down. Now, Quicken Loans has done a more sophisticated example of this in their mortgage process, where literally by clicking on this screen, you can find out exactly where your mortgage application is in the underwriting process and literally see whose desk it's sitting on. Now, one of the benefits, besides educating the customer on where it is that the customer is now acting as a quality control manager also. So the customer can actually submit a message that says, I noticed that my application is sitting on Mary Lou's desk, and for the last 3 days, is she on vacation? So you don't just have the supervisor of the underwriting department supervising the process, you now have the customer supervising the process. And again, we find that it enhances customer satisfaction dramatically. Now, the requirement here is that you have to be willing to open your internal operations process up to the customer, which is scary. But what we find is, the minute you do that, the customer feels a feeling of control and feels much more satisfied. For instance, we have a construction company that's opened up their project management software to the customer, and for most home renovations, it's the wife that's managing the process. And what we found was that when the wife is going into the software multiple times a week, her satisfaction is dramatically higher with the contractor, and B, she is injecting more quality control. She can say, oh, have you ordered those fixtures, or are those the right fixtures that you've ordered? And it eliminates a tremendous number of disasters and fire drills. But again, it requires the guts to open your system up so the customer can see it. Now, another challenge is that in many organizations there are unpleasant aspects of a transaction. And when you're getting your car repaired, one of the things that people don't like is they get the invoice and it says our labor rate is $110 an hour. And most customers' reaction to that is, that's outrageous. Well, this is a 6-foot sign that is in this Mercedes-Benz dealer's customer waiting area, and also behind the cashier. And it basically says our average hourly rate is only $110 an hour, and here's all the stuff you're getting: a bunch of loaners and genuine parts and the best diagnostic equipment. And so what we then find is that you're justifying this to the customer, and oh, by the way, at the bottom of the sign it says, and your local plumber is $165 an hour. We're cheap. The best defense is a good offense. And again, I would argue quality needs to be involved in all this proactive customer education and communication. It's totally foreign to most people on the phone, but it's absolutely where you need to go professionally if you're really going to have an impact on the customer experience. One last example, FedEx is educating the customer on what their responsibilities are. And I have presented with FedEx executives, and they always cringe when I show this slide, because this is part of their website, and it basically says, here's what we do to smash your package in the belly of an airplane. And at the bottom, it sort of shows all the different bad things that can happen in an airplane. The next page is, here are your responsibilities as a customer for preventing damage. Customers will play by the rules if they're told what the rules are. Now, in measuring the customer experience, we find there are 6 big opportunities: the data sources, how you collect the data, how you integrate it, how you analyze it, how you report it, and then how you use it. We're going to touch on each of these quickly. First, everybody uses surveys and focus groups. People are looking at social media. Our concern is that social media is not representative, and as I said earlier, we find that most Americans don't go social until you've jerked them around at least twice. And so it certainly is useful information, but has to be taken somewhat with a grain of salt. The customer contacts is absolutely a powerful source. One of the things we find in most contact centers is that you have people listening to the calls, and they're monitoring those calls and evaluating, did Mary Lou, the rep, handle the call the right way. But 2 points. First is the monitoring person also asking themselves, why are we getting this call, and doing a root cause analysis using the framework I suggested earlier. Most of the time the answer is no. And if they're evaluating the call, does the evaluation provided by the monitor tie back to customer survey results? We find in most contact centers that the monitor will give a call a 95 and the customer might give it a 75. What that means is what you're monitoring for is not what's important to the customer. So the survey results and the monitoring results should be correlated, and if they don't fit together perfectly, you've got a problem. You're basically incenting your representatives to give service in the wrong areas. Also, a la my FedEx example, the transaction failures are actually a better picture than surveys. If we know that there were 200 packages in the container that missed a flight, and we got 50 phone calls and 20 surveys, which of those data sources is actually going to be best to allow you to size the problem? Our contention is, in many cases, your operational data will be a better estimate of how many customers have had the problem than the complaint data or the survey data. Also, you have system outages. You know how many people encountered that outage. Another thing that almost no one looks at is website search failures, because every time a customer goes to your website, searches for something, and then doesn't find it, there's a very high probability they're going to now pick up the phone and call. But what we find is very few organizations ever even look at website search failures. And then finally, your frontline employees are one of your best consultants in terms of improving the process. And we find in most organizations there is no simple mechanism for them to make input. In most organizations, oh, well, the front line is supposed to tell the supervisor who will pass it on. There's a huge amount of filtering. At Southern California Edison, they had the quality root cause analyst set up an email box, and frontline employees were told, if you participate in a fiasco that shouldn't have taken place, send a short email to the root cause analyst and we'll take it from there. And what we found was, as long as you give feedback to the front line on what you're doing with their feedback, that's a very valuable source of information, and it doesn't need to be sophisticated. Can just be a simple email box. Happy to talk to people more about that offline. Now, in terms of integration of the data, you have a whole bunch of different touch points, and the question is, how do you integrate the data? And what we have found is that the best thing is to do a quick survey of a random sample of your customers. And in this case, what we've done is we've gone to airline customers and said, have you had any problems? If you did have a problem, did you complain? Where did you complain? And just by asking those 3 questions, we identified we had 100 customers who encountered a rude gate agent. 90% didn't complain. But of those who did complain, they complained to customer relations or social media, or a few went to an executive. So you can identify what percentage of customers go to different locations. And once you have an idea of where people go when they have problems, you can then interpret the contact data that you're getting, the touch point data. In this case, we know that 16 people complained to customer relations. About 2.5% of people will go to customer relations, so that's a multiplier of 40. So 16 times 40 means that our best estimate is 640 people encountered a rude gate agent last month. Now, we got 2 nasty emails. We know that about 1 out of 500 will complain via email to an executive. That implies 1,000 instances in the marketplace. And so by knowing how many contacts we got and a rough estimate of what the multiplier is, you can now take all these different touch point pieces of data and integrate them and extrapolate to the marketplace to say, how many instances do we think really were in the marketplace? Now, this is dirty data. It doesn't fit together perfectly, but based on 6 different touch points, we can say our best guess, averaging them, is that about 750 people had this problem at O'Hare Airport last month. And encountering a rude gate agent at the bottom of the page implies a 20% damage to loyalty. The average customer is worth $4,000. We can now say that the 16 calls to customer relations, the 2 emails, and the 20 tweets actually imply $600,000 in monthly revenue impact. So you're taking fragmentary contact data and extrapolating it to the marketplace and coming up with robust revenue impact data. And we find this is critically important if you're going to get finance to really buy in to investment in a better customer experience. Again, the revenue implications of better service and quality are 10 to 20 times the cost implications, and one needs to gather the data and be able to extrapolate to the marketplace to say how many customers have actually encountered this, rather than saying, oh, we got 16 complaints to customer relations. And this, I think, is the biggest fundamental challenge we've seen to most quality professionals is you're working with the 16 occurrences that are reported to the plant, and the implications of those 16 customers is chump change, but you need to be able to extrapolate it to the marketplace so you can get people's attention. And again, happy to answer questions as we go along. Now, in terms of data collection with surveys, most of the world is now surveying everything in sight. It's what I call the annual Do You Love Us survey. And every transaction is getting surveyed. And we all are getting way too many surveys, and fatigue has set in, and cynicism has set in, and people are not answering the surveys anymore. Our suggestion is that in most cases, 80% of all the transactions you have with customers are no-brainers that anyone could have handled. Why are you doing surveys of those? Because the chances are they were well handled. Our suggestion is only focus on important transactions rather than a random sample. Another challenge that companies are facing is there's now been a rise in what are called enterprise feedback management systems. These are large software packages that basically make 2 promises to companies. Buy our $500,000 software package and you can survey everything in sight, and it'll report back in such a way that you don't need to think anymore. Well, the real problem with those packages is that they're almost all totally focused on Mary Lou, the frontline rep, who in most cases is doing the best she can with the response processes and tools she's been given. And so it doesn't allow you to analyze, where do we have systemic issues, where do we have bad response rules, where do we have sales and marketing creating unnecessary problems. And so really, the enterprise feedback management systems are wasting a ton of money surveying all the wrong things and not providing an impactful analysis. Also, we find most surveys come from the positive perspective, everything's great, isn't it? Well, customers don't believe anything's going to be done with that survey. On the other hand, our suggestion is you lead with problems. Hey, when a customer has an ongoing relationship, stuff happens, here's a list of 30 problems you might have had with us. what we find is that customers are immediately engaged, and you get dramatically higher response rates when you lead off with, hey, what problems have you had, especially if you list the problems. And this becomes important because the problems that we find that do the most damage are sales and marketing problems, because I'm willing to forgive an operational issue, but the fact your sales rep lied to me or misled me about delivery intervals, that I really don't forgive. And so we have actually found sales and marketing issues do 4 times the damage of operational issues, but the complaint rates on those are actually lower. So if on your list of problems you say to the customer, have you been misled by our sales rep? Did the sales rep fail to deliver? Did the sales rep not have the necessary knowledge of your company? All of a sudden, you've now given the customer permission to say, well, now that you mention it, yeah, that is an issue, because most customers are too polite or too afraid to tell you about those kinds of issues, but ironically, those are the issues that do the most damage. Also, everybody is now using a 1 to 10 point scale versus a 5-point scale, and this is because of Net Promoter, which I'll come back to in a couple of minutes, but we basically find that in most cases a 5-point scale labeled from very satisfied to very dissatisfied works just as well. And again, we have articles that describe this. And then finally, you get a much better response rate on your surveys if you motivate the customer in the invitation by saying, here are 2 things we've done recently with customer feedback. The minute customers see that you're actually doing something with their feedback, the probability that they will respond to the survey goes up dramatically. And let me, okay, there. Now, in terms of analysis of the surveys, everybody does a key driver analysis of their surveys. What are the key drivers of satisfaction? We think that there are actually 2 sets of key drivers. There are key drivers for customers who've had a recent problem, and there are key drivers for people who haven't. My example would be in the utility industry. To the degree that I've had no recent power outages, it's basically, you know, am I happy with your bills, and do they make sense? And aside from that, I'm fairly benign. The minute I have a power outage, the immediate communication and how quickly you get the power back becomes most important. So what we find is when customers have a problem, all of a sudden a completely different set of drivers take over. So in any analysis of surveys, you need to look at problem versus no problem. Also, rather than analyzing satisfaction, we think that the key things are to focus on the bottom line impact, and there are at least 4 ways of looking at bottom line impact. First, how much revenue is at risk? And that presupposes you know what your customer is worth. You've all heard the term lifetime value. We actually have an article entitled The Death of Lifetime Value, which says you can talk about lifetime value until the cows come home. No finance guy is going to invest in that. Because, to quote one CFO, who knows if we're even going to be in this business 10 years from now. So you need to look at a conservative value of the customer, and then how much revenue is at risk. What's the impact of word of mouth? What's the impact on sensitivity to price? Can we charge a premium? And for oligopolistic environments and business to business, the big thing is what's the share of wallet you're getting? Because almost every company will have 2 or 3 suppliers, and you want to be the one who gets the largest amount. And then finally, you want to verify, do people actually do what they say they're going to do, by looking at the survey data and then actually tracking real customer purchases over the next year to see, do customers do what they say they're going to do. Now, to be able to understand the impact of problems, going back to the example survey I showed earlier, you basically want to identify from customers, have you had a problem? If so, did you complain? What's your satisfaction? And then what's the impact on willingness to repurchase and also to recommend? And the word of mouth on the right-hand side is the number of people who are told. So if I have a problem, complain, and I'm satisfied, loyalty actually goes to 90%, and I'm telling 1.7, call it 2 people. If I'm dissatisfied, loyalty drops 20 points, and I'm now telling 5 people bad things about the organization. The most important thing for quality is to understand that you're not hearing from a lot of the customers. This is the bottom row where 75% of customers don't complain. Loyalty is somewhat damaged, but you're still spreading a lot of negative word of mouth. Once you have this kind of data, and again, you basically can get this by going to a sample of your customers, saying, have you had any problems? Did you complain? And if so, how well did we handle it? What's the impact on your loyalty? You then can start saying, okay, we have 100,000 customers who had problems, and doing the math across, we see 46,000 customers are at risk, and that's $46 million. And this chart then implies 3 strategies. You can prevent problems, get customers to complain about them, or improve your response to them. And this chart gets finance's attention. Now, if we, and actually there was a typo on this should have been 200,000. I'm not sure where that got changed. So we'd have 200,000 customers with problems, and then it multiplies across. Now, if we reduce problems by 25%, going from 200,000 to 150,000, we reduce the number of customers at risk, and we add $11 million to the top line, plus we reduce the number of service calls by 12,000. Now, I'm whizzing through this quickly. We have a great paper that describes this in detail, but the basic point is you need to be able to look at how many customers have problems, how many are you hearing from, and how many are having their problems resolved. And those are the 3 strategies that we argue quality should be taking the lead on. You traditionally focus on problem prevention, but you focus on operational problem prevention when in fact customer-caused issues and sales and marketing issues may be the majority. Now, if we spend $1 million investing in quality for prevention of problems, we're going to get an ROI of 187%. And that's an ROI that will get finance's attention. Now, this is data courtesy of Motorola. It's very old data, which is why they've allowed us to use it. But basically, we've done the same kind of analysis looking at what's the damage of different kinds of problems. And the most impactful problem was meeting promised delivery dates. Again, the salesman lied to get the order. And 1.3% of customers are at risk. The second most prevalent problem, a la Pareto analysis, is product availability within desired time frame. And they were about to spend millions of dollars raising inventories until we looked at how many people said they wouldn't buy. 0. Yeah, it's a problem, but as long as I know I have to order on a 4-week time horizon, I'm willing to live with that. So investing lots of money enhancing inventories would give you no payoff in the marketplace. On the other hand, unreturned phone calls does tremendous damage. 33.3% of those customers will not recommend you, and 2.4% of your whole customer base is at risk. So you can identify how many customers are at risk by type of problem and set your priorities based on revenue impact rather than just straight plain old Pareto. So in terms of reporting, we find that most voice of the customer processes are a massive report that has all the data. Rather than giving people tons of data that require interpretation, we suggest you identify the 3 biggest issues, and you should be so lucky as people take action on that. Now, you also want to tailor the report to each function, which is more work, but what we find is the reports are much more actionable. Also, another thing that we suggest quality do is you don't just say, hey, you got this problem, but here's my suggested action plan for how do you fix it. And the argument here is that you say to the operational manager, you know your operation better than I do, but if I were you, I would do this. When we saw that done at Toyota, it reduced cycle time by 30% because this operational manager wasn't having to do the foundational analysis. You'd already done that for them. Humanize the data with quotes and recordings. Don't say people are doing a bad job. Show them how much more money they can make by enhancing the customer experience. I had a Toyota dealer in northern New Jersey who looked like Tony Soprano who said, you know, I think all this customer satisfaction stuff is a bunch of crap, but if it'll make me more money, I'll do it. Greed works. And then finally, identify the key opportunities to proactively warn the customer to stay out of trouble. That's your biggest opportunity. Now, one of the things that's come to the fore in the past 2 years is Net Promoter and broad indices. I have an article entitled Net Promoter is like global warming. Lots of hand-wringing, very little action. We think that the two latest fads, Net Promoter and Customer Effort, are basically indices for lazy executives, because you need to show the detail as to what's causing the reading before anybody can do anything. Again, we've got strong opinions on that, but I at least wanted to go on the record. And then finally, once one identifies the problems, quantifies the implication, and gives recommendations, we find that it's critical for there to be action planning, an action planning record or diary that says here's what we're doing to implement, and again, the job of quality is to report, did the needle actually move? And so we suggest there are 8 key factors that lead to an effective voice of the customer process. One person needs to have ownership of the entire voice of the customer process. My suggestion is it should be quality. You work with the contact center, you work with market research, but integrating and coordinating all this is heavy lifting. No one else wants to do it, so if you say, I'll take the lead in coordinating it, you get ownership. Then that allows you to come up with a unified data collection plan across the entire customer life cycle. And if you have that unified plan, then step 3 works, which is you can integrate the data to come up with how many instances are there in the marketplace. You can also report at a granular, actionable level. My point here is that to say we have billing issues is not useful. You need to be able to say exactly what transactions are causing the billing issues. You have to be able to quantify the revenue implications of inaction for a month. And again, we learned this at Toyota 2 decades ago when I went to management and said this engine hesitation problem is going to cost you $50 million over the next year. And the reaction was, oh, that's terrible. Let's set up a task force and study it for 3 months. And I learned something. I then said for each month you don't take action, it's going to cost you $4.6 million. Translation, feel free to study this for 3 months. That's $13 million down the rat hole. If you can quantify the cost of inaction for a month, you precipitate action. And again, the revenue implications are 10 to 20 times the cost implications. Then you need to recommend specific actions, and if you take this action, here's how much the needle will move. Step 7 is saying, did the needle move? And then step 8, you tie responsiveness to the voice of the customer to specific indices. These are the 4 areas that I've sort of touched on today that are also the toughest areas. So to get started, you need to analyze your service and support workload. This will tell you where customers are having problems, and it'll tell you, is it an expectational issue? Is it a customer competence issue? And we find customers do cause 30% of all their own problems. My favorite example is Clorox was a client of ours, and they get not a complaint, but a helpful suggestion. Why don't you make Clorox taste better? People brush their teeth with it, and it does whiten your teeth. It also whitens your esophagus. People do dumb things. You need to save the customer. You want to identify what are the top 10 questions or problems customers encounter, pick a couple of those and take action. Identify which of those problems can be anticipated, a la my Harley-Davidson dead battery issue, and can you prevent the problem not by re-engineering the product, but by better educating the customer. Then take action in terms of educate customers on their top 3 mistakes, fix one process that's driving employees nuts to give the employees hope that you're actually going to improve things, and create a cross-functional customer experience steering committee. So in summary, you need to understand there's a non-complaint behavior, especially in the business-to-business environment. On surveys, you need to aid the customer with a problem list so they'll tell you about the sales and marketing things they're otherwise too polite to talk about. You need to create a unified voice of the customer process to identify the best opportunities based on revenue implications and word of mouth, and then create a detailed action plan and create accountability, and then Finally, use technology to proactively educate and connect with the customer and explain and deliver what I call psychic pizza. So hopefully I have instigated some thoughts in some areas and gotten you to think out of the box. Norval, do we have any questions at this point, or let me open it up to questions?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box at the moment, but while we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions they'd like to submit through the chat box, I did see a couple of comments as you were going through your talk, John. One of them had to do with recertification units for ASQ. Probably misspoke as earlier when we first started here. We will provide a certificate of attendance for today's webinar so that if you are tracking recertification units for ASQ certifications, you will have that documentation from today that you can use. So we will make sure that you have a certificate of attendance whether or not if you're an ASQ member or not. And secondly, I also saw a question about getting a copy of the slide deck. And what we have on file is the email address that each one of you used when you registered for the webinar. So if you would like a copy of the slide deck, feel free to let us know or let John know, and here I can provide you with a copy of today's slide deck.
Also, you've got my email address at the bottom of the slide that's up right now, jgoodman@customercaremc.com. And also we have depending on your industry, we have papers that address these types of issues in your industry, because literally we've worked in every industry under the sun. And one question we get a lot is, does this behavior apply in governmental or nonprofit settings? And the answer is absolutely. We've worked in educational environments, arts and museum environments with about 30 different government agencies, and what we have found is that both the behaviors I've talked about and the solutions absolutely apply whether you're a small nonprofit, a 10-person startup, or a major multinational. The behaviors are the same, the solutions may be more or less sophisticated, but we find simplicity and better a small success than a big disaster works very, very well. Okay, I don't see any. Oh,
John, one just came up.
Actually, we've now gotten a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Let me scroll back up.
There's one from Monique Getzinger. I don't know if you can see hers or not.
Okay, well actually the one I'm looking at right now, any suggestions on appropriate level of resources to commit to voice of the customer? Let me give you one benchmark which may or may not be helpful. At Toyota, for every 25 people they had on the phones, they had one person saying, why are we getting all these calls? So if you're looking at what your service expense is, if you allocated 4% to the sort of what I'd call the broad voice of the customer preventive analysis, customer education activity, that would give you something sort of in the ballpark. And also what we find is that if one doesn't waste money doing surveys on stuff that's not important, but focuses on key points of pain rather than trying to do the entire waterfront, then you can get much more cost effective with your voice of the customer process. In answer to have we done this in healthcare? Absolutely. I actually have an article in Patient Safety that talks about leveraging complaint data and surveys in the healthcare area. Send me an email and I'll be happy to send it to you. But the bottom line is we actually find complaint rates in healthcare are especially low due to fear of retribution, because most consumers have seen the Seinfeld episode where Elaine complained about the appointments nurse, and they put a red check next to her name so she never got another appointment. And we find that about only 15% of patients and families actually complain about their most serious problem because they're picking their battles and they're very fearful of retribution. So yeah, we've done this in both large healthcare institutions, MRI environments, plus medical device and pharma environments, and we've got a bunch of examples I'd be happy to talk to you about offline. Just send me an email. And let's see, aside from that, I think, okay, last question that was asked is there a break-even point in obtaining and analyzing voice of the customer? The critical point here would be to identify one or two of the ongoing issues that everyone has known about for years that drive both employees and customers nuts, and gather a focused voice of the customer just on that issue that allows you to build a rough economic model of, for each month we don't take action, how much is this costing us? And then fix that one issue and then move on. And if that issue gets fixed, all of a sudden you've now created credibility for the voice of the customer. Hey, we're not just doing surveys that nobody really takes action on. Hey, we gathered some voice of the customer, something actually got fixed, and the needle moved, so now people are more willing to invest in a more robust voice of the customer. Again, better a small success than a big disaster. I would pick one or two issues, and don't pick the hardest one that requires $1 million in systems changes. Pick something that's customer education oriented, and you will find that you can leverage a little bit of resources and have a big impact, become a hero, and then once you fix that, you move on to the next thing. That's the approach that we have found seems to work very, very effectively. It's also described in my book in a fair amount of detail. So, Norval, thank you very much for your time. I think we are a little bit over at this point, but thank you all for attending, and thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, John. Next Monday, as I mentioned, the next webinar will be the problem with root cause analysis. We hope to see many of you online for that one. Until then, everybody have a good day. Thanks. Bye now.
Bye.